My name is Peter Rolinson. I qualified in chemistry from the University of Manchester in the late 1970s. For many years since then, I've worked as a water treatment chemist, and for many of those years I've worked on oil production sites, looking at the water used on site and many of the issues faced by the oil industry as regards the potential for contamination of water supplies. This has given me some insight into many of these issues and many of the methods used to control these issues. I'm also a resident of Walkington, which is very close to the Crawberry Hill site, where Rathlin Energy are currently undergoing exploratory drilling for oil and gas. Much has been made of the potential for Rathlin, or perhaps other companies, to carry out fracking on these sites. And while I emphasise I'm not personally against oil exploration in general, I do acknowledge that we do need to discover other sources of fossil fuels in the short term at least. I don't believe that fracking is the best way forward. The reason I say this is that I do have concerns that fracking will cause potential water contamination. Water in the East Yorkshire, as anywhere else in the UK, is an extremely precious resource. Even more so in East Yorkshire. Most of the drinking water comes from one very large aquifer. This is different to other parts of the UK. Over in the western half of the country, most of the drinking water comes from surface water sources such as rivers and lakes, etc. For instance, much of Manchester gets its water from the Lake District. In East Yorkshire, most of the eastern half in Britain in general, we don't have large surface water supplies. The water comes from underground sources referred to as aquifers. In East Yorkshire, it's one extremely large aquifer which stretches from Bridlington in the north out to Market Wheaton in the west, all through the towns of Beverley down into the northern parts of Hull. So any contamination, even slight contamination of this aquifer, could cause major issues for a large population. All oil exploration will involve drilling down through the aquifer. As the oil or gas is released, there could be the potential for organic chemicals to be released into the aquifer, particularly chemicals such as methane, benzene, toluene or xylene, albeit in very low concentrations. This would be bad enough, but Yorkshire Water, any water company, are duty bound to chlorinate the water. If they didn't, there would be quite nasty bugs growing in the water which would cause all sorts of problems. Once Yorkshire Water chlorinate the water, there is the potential for reaction between the chlorine disinfectant the company puts in and the organic chemicals. This reaction could lead to potentially very harmful chemicals such as chloroform, carbon tetrachloride, trichlorophenol being formed in the water. These are commonly referred to by the water supply companies as trihalomethanes. A trihalomethane is a generic term for a product that is formed when organic chemicals such as methane, benzene, toluene react with chlorine. To give you a particular example, if phenol is found in oil deposits, which is very, very common, phenol will react with chlorine to form trichlorophenol, otherwise known as TCP. This is present nearly in all water systems to a lesser or greater extent. This is why sometimes you will taste the sort of chlorine type taste when you open the tap in the morning. The gas that may be down in the shale is methane, CH4, methane. If that reacts with chlorine, the chlorine will replace the hydrogen and form carbon tetrachloride, one of the constituents of dry cleaning fluid. Do we really want dry cleaning fluid in our drinking water? I don't think so. One of the other contaminants could be the reaction of chlorine, again with methane, to form chloroform. We all know about chloroform. The list is endless. Chlorine will react with any organic contaminant in the water, react very, very quickly, and that process is irreversible. It won't go away if you leave the water standing. You couldn't take a glass of water, say, okay, I believe it's contaminated, just leave it on the side and it will go away. It doesn't happen like that. The water treatment companies would need to measure it, determine the level of contamination, and undergo a very time-consuming and costly procedure to get rid of them. If this gets beyond certain levels, the water companies are duty bound to treat the water to remove these trihalomethanes, which are many and varied in constituency. If the levels get too high, it can become very difficult for the water treatment companies to remove these, and it can lead to lack of water supply or turning off the taps. I was involved in an incident in Bradford some years ago where urban contamination of the water supplies led to high levels of the THMs in the water supply and led to a large area of Bradford being without their normal water supply for some months, which cost a lot of time and a lot of effort in the clean-up procedure. My concern is that if fracking takes place at any site, not just Crawberry Hill, not just West Newton, at any site, the potential for contamination of the aquifer is increased. I don't particularly have any issues against conventional oil extraction. It's not great for the environment, but the risks involved in conventional oil extraction are far less than fracking. With fracking, it involves drilling down into very great depths into the shale level, some 3,000 metres below the surface, and then drilling horizontally in lots of different directions, then setting off explosions at these great depths. If you can imagine, that would cause shock waves through the rock and lead to fractures in the normally very stable rock structure. This could then allow gas, contaminants, all sorts of products to seep through these fractures and into the aquifer, which is about 2,000 metres above the shale. Many people have said that rock between the shale and the aquifer is impermeable. It would be impossible for any chemicals to get into the aquifer. Maybe, but there is a risk that if there are serious fractures, even small amounts of methane, toluene, xylene, phenols, benzenes, all very noxious chemicals, could then seep into that aquifer and react with the chlorine that the water companies are putting in, and we have the result that we have excessive levels of trihalomethane and a very dangerous situation. It is vital that we maintain the integrity of the aquifer. We cannot afford the slightest risk of contamination of this vital water supply for East Yorkshire. We don't have alternative water sources. As I said before, the aquifer is a very large aquifer, one of the largest in the UK, and is our only main source of drinking water supply. It is possible that water companies can ship water in. This is what happened in the Bradford incident I was discussing earlier on. But you think about the volumes of water used for a large population from Bridlington down through Market, Wheaton, Beverley. I'm unsure of the exact population of that area, but you've got to be talking 100,000 plus. If each person uses 10 litres of water per day, that's 1 million litres of water per day to be shifted around the country by road tanker. Doable, but think of the transport costs, think of just the general number of tankers on the road. We did have this issue some years ago when there was a drought situation in West Yorkshire, and a lot of water was shipped from East Yorkshire over to places like Huddersfield, Halifax. It was doable, but it was at tremendous cost and tremendous environmental impact. People have also said that Yorkshire Water could just treat the water and get rid of these problems. Again, it's doable, but many water treatment plants are sized for a certain level of contaminant in the water and a certain volume of water per day. If that level of contaminants increases dramatically, the water treatment plants we currently have would be incapable of treating that volume of water to a satisfactory standard. It would cause tremendous issues. It's been seen in countries overseas where water treatment plants have just been overwhelmed by the level of contaminant in the water from environmental issues, not just fracking, but agricultural issues, horticultural issues, etc. We don't want that to occur in East Yorkshire. One issue that also needs to be considered is private boreholes. So far we've been focusing on mains water supply to the general public, which is the vast majority of water supply, but certainly in the East Yorkshire area, many remote farmers, other people that live miles away from the normal distribution system have private boreholes, have done for many years. Many of these borehole water supplies aren't treated through the normal water treatment routes. There's been no problem with those. People have been drinking this water for years, they get used to it, that's fine. But if this contamination spreads to those private borehole supplies, that could be a real issue. If you're in a farm that's 10 miles, 5 miles from the nearest water distribution network, that's your only water supply, if they're seriously contaminated, you certainly won't have the resource to deal with the problem. What's going to happen then? The general public or the farmers themselves could go out and get bottled water. What about the animals on the farm? If you've got cattle, they're going to need a lot of water. They rely on that borehole supply. It could be a very difficult position. Many people say, okay, irrigation, it can be taken from ditches, drains, etc. But if you are using mains water or treated water, there's an issue. Again, irrigation, you may not be able to irrigate crops. Crops themselves, if crops are in close by a fracking site, there could be serious contamination by runoff, certainly air pollution if they're flaring off from a fracking site and you've got crops in the field just downwind. I wouldn't want to eat those crops. Could be a major problem. If we do get these chemicals in the water, it would take years to clean up, and the potential risk would remain as long as fracking continues. Water is just one issue though. There's also the issue of air pollution. Having worked on oil processing sites, sulphur is a great enemy of oil processors. All oil and gas deposits will contain elemental sulphur to some extent. Once this is released into the atmosphere, you've got the potential to form chemicals such as sulphur dioxide, which is essentially the product behind acid rain, or more interestingly, hydrogen sulfide, the bad egg gas. This is why many oil processing or oil extraction sites have gas detectors around the site to detect these levels of gas in the air. Rathlin have admitted that if they do find oil or gas at any of the sites, there will be the potential to flare off millions of cubic feet of gas per day. Even at the exploratory phase, it would involve large volumes of gas being flared off. This is where the gas comes out of the wellhead, if you like, under high pressure and is then vented to atmosphere. It can't be allowed just to sort of blow over the countryside, so they actually burn it. But as with any burning, if you had a bonfire, you think of the contaminants coming out of a normal garden bonfire. This is much greater potential. So these contaminants will be in the air. If the wind is in from its normal direction, westerly direction, those contaminants will be pushed over the westward down into Beverley. It is highly likely that people in villages such as Bishop Burton, the western edges of Beverley, will be able to notice a distinct smell in the air. As part of the liaison committee, I am on the liaison committee that meets with Rathlin on a regular basis, they have admitted that they will need to put in these gas detectors. They are already monitoring the water that is coming out of boreholes around the site just to build up a ground level, if you like, or a background level of the water quality, so that when they continue the exploration, they have a lot of information already about current water quality. They will be looking for any change in that water quality, even very small levels of change. If they see anything, they will hopefully react very quickly. I'm sure that Rathlin are a reputable company. They will be doing everything they can to protect the reputation, but should we be in that position in the first place? Should they be fracking in East Yorkshire in a very sensitive aquifer area? If it's surface water, that's bad enough. Fracking's already taking place in Lancashire. We know the problems there. There have been earthquakes. There's probably less issue associated there because, as I said before, it's surface water. If one surface water area gets contaminated, it is much simpler to look at an alternative source. That won't be the case if it's the aquifer. Once it's in the aquifer deep down, it would be a nightmare to clean up. If there's air pollution, it will spread over a very, very wide area. Rathlin are certainly concerned about that and have admitted that they will need to put in the appropriate test measures. There's a lot of questions being asked about exactly what chemicals will be put down. What we've seen so far, that Rathlin, amongst other companies, are keeping this information very close to their chest. They're saying it's commercially sensitive, but there are a huge cocktail of chemicals being used. None of them are very pleasant, and some of them are extremely toxic. They are saying it's commercially sensitive information, but there could be over 600 chemicals being pushed down the well on a regular basis under very high pressure. Now, these chemicals should be contained within the well, rather than saying the well is being lined with concrete and steel. All well and good, and many of these wells will be thoroughly sealed for many years, but it is well proven that many of the wells also crack. Maybe not many, but a significant number. And as these wells age, going to 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, the integrity of that well will diminish, and the chances of that well casing cracking will only increase, with the potential risk of these noxious chemicals again being released into the aquifer. Many people are looking at this. This is the major area of concern. So we've got two issues here. One is the fracking chemicals going down the well. If that well remains intact, all well and good. If it doesn't, could be a disaster. And then we're talking about the potential release of toxins into the water from the deposits down there, the oil and gas, the methane, the benzene, toluenes, and the disinfectant byproducts. If fracking goes ahead, there will be a considerable number of wells in a very small area. And even if it's 5% of failures, let's say there's 100 wells in East Yorkshire, which I think is a conservative amount. If it's just 5%, that's 5 wells into this sensitive aquifer. We don't want one well failing, never mind 5. So for the oil company to say most of the wells will be fine and acknowledge there will be a few well failures, that's just not acceptable. We can't allow that in this very, very sensitive water area. I can't emphasise enough that if the contamination occurs, it could be a disaster for the people of East Yorkshire. There are definitely treatment methods that can be used to remove the contaminants from the water, but with the water treatment plants that Yorkshire Water have at the moment, for obvious commercial reasons, they will have sized their water treatment plants for a certain volume of water per day, okay, millions of gallons of water per day, but a certain level of contaminants. And if nothing happens out of the ordinary to the water supply, that system works perfectly well. But if the amount of contaminants in the water increase or change in any way to a significant amount, those water treatment plants will be overwhelmed, and Yorkshire Water may well not have the resource to cope. Whether they could put in extra treatment very, very quickly would depend on the amount of contaminants and the level and how much water they have to treat. There are methods that can do it. Things like reverse osmosis, ultrafiltration are well known, But to get that sort of equipment in place very quickly, well, it can't be done very quickly. It can be done, but it would take some time and at tremendous cost. Who pays the cost? They are, in the general scheme of things, a relatively small player. They are owned by Connaught of Canada. Even Connaught are a relatively small player. It is a concern that if there's a major problem, Rathlin won't have the resource, and it will be East Riding of Yorkshire Council, Yorkshire Water, the local population that are left to face these issues. If it's serious contamination, we're talking at least weeks, months, possibly a year. In the Bradford case, it was getting on for 12 months, and that was a relatively low level of contamination. It was high enough to prevent the people using the water on a normal basis, but not disastrously so. And Yorkshire Water put in steps to remove that contamination relatively quickly, but it still took almost 12 months for the problem to be resolved completely. I was involved in the original planning application between Rathlin and East Riding of Yorkshire Council, and the villagers of Walkington worked hard to get the no fracking clause put into that planning permission. So we're extremely concerned that they're starting to maybe bend the rules a little bit. Although, again, I have to emphasise, trying to be fair to Rathlin, they have stated time and time again that they will not frack at this site. But let's emphasise, they will not frack at this site. They will not frack at this site. Somebody else may frack at another site. The problems will still be there. What we need to do is raise public awareness of the potential issues and let the public ask those questions for themselves. Rathlin again have stated that they will make information available as and when they can, and certainly they've had over 20 liaison meetings. I've been to the vast majority of those, and my role is to pass on that information to the local people. But behind the scenes, there may be other things going on that they're not informing the people of yet. We just don't know. Well, the population of Walkington is no longer a small village. It's 2,500. Now, it's very difficult for two people to try and contact 2,000 people on an effective basis. But we do put information in the local newsletter. The minutes of the meeting are also put in the newsletter. There are regular informal meetings with as many people as we can, but it is true to say that there is a significant proportion of the Walkington population that are still unaware of what's going on at Crawberry Hill. That proportion is diminishing all the time, but just talking to people in the village, many people are either unaware or unfortunately just don't care. There will be a considerable number of tanker movements. A lot of these oil sites will be remote, and the only way they can get product in and out, the wastewater, any resource they need, will be by road tanker. These road tankers will be minimum size 20 tonnes, more likely 30 tonnes, big road tankers. There will be a considerable number or considerable volume of materials moved by road tankers. So on an average day, an average oil site could see 200 to 300 tankers coming in and out. That will vary over a period of time, but it will certainly, people will certainly notice a vast increase in traffic movement around their area. The roads are already full of traffic. 200 to 300 tankers on top of that could be a nightmare. I think with the potential contamination of the water, the air pollution, the transport, the lack of economic benefit, I don't think fracking should be considered in this country at all. There must be a reason why France, Bulgaria, I believe Germany, many states in the USA have banned it. There must be a reason. Things like this don't get banned just on a whim. People must have looked at it very closely and said, it's not for us. I don't think it should be for the UK either.